Good evening, tributes. Welcome back to Hunger Games Chronicles. Thank you for taking the time to come watch the 106 to 110th Hunger Games. Some of you may be confused about why they're in collections and not like one single video, but the thing is, I want to achieve my goal of 150 games, and to do that I have to shorten some of the games so I have more time to write. Thank you for understanding. Now let's go back to Panem. The 106th Hunger Games took place in the year 128 and took place in snowy mountains. They featured mountain bears, had a main event of an avalanche, and lasted for 11 days. The 106th Hunger Games reminded Capital citizens and future tributes alike that the slightest mistake in the arena can change the entire outcome of the games. This year's victor was Lily Muller, aged 17 from District 11. During the bloodbath, Lily watched as 6 tributes were slaughtered with machetes by Bronze from 1, who had scored a training score of 12. However, despite being nervous, Lily ran inwards as well and grabbed a knife, before killing Garrison from 2 and fleeing from the cornucopia before watching as Bronze stabbed a girl from 2 to death. After fleeing, Lily spent the next few days walking through the mountains and looking for shelter. On the 3rd day, she got some bread and water as a sponsor gift and used these to stay hydrated. After prowling the mountains and hiding in a cave, she killed Martina and Jonathan, both from 12, on the 6th day. By the 9th day, the number of tributes had dropped to 10, and as Lily left her shelter to get some fresh air, she heard the sound of an announcement from game maker Stella Griffin. Griffin announced that the rocks would begin falling from the perimeter inwards, and the only way to escape to safety was to enter the cornucopia. Lily decided that this was not worth the risk and barricaded herself inside her cave. As the rockfall began, Lily was safe and she was hiding. Surprisingly, no one was killed during the rockfalls and were instead killed by Bronze when he decapitated them with his machetes. Lily watched as the hovercraft retrieved both parts of Bronze's many victims, frowning in disgust. The next day, she traveled towards the cornucopia, as it would be likely that there would be a major event happening. She soon came face to face with a bear, and it roared at her. However, she turned around and stepped away, leaping into the nearest cave as a boulder fell in front of the entrance, which locked the bear out, but locked Lily in. She screamed for help and struggled to breathe, but noticed a tiny stone that was holding up many large rocks towards the side of the cave. She squeezed her eyes shut and pulled the stone out, and the rocks crumbled down before she leapt out and ran as fast as she could in the opposite direction, climbing down the mountains towards the cornucopia meadow. By the 11th day, only Lily, Bronze, and her district partner, Othello, remained. As Lily woke up and relieved herself, she noticed rocks falling from the neighboring mountain. As the avalanche reached her mountain, she tripped and fell, before rolling down the mountain and hitting her arm on a rock. As she caught her breath and yelled in pain, she did not realize that Bronze had seen her. However, he thought that she was Othello, due to their similar hairstyles. Bronze crawled on the ground towards Lily, and only her hair was visible. As he crawled, he did not notice the actual Othello slowly following him. As soon as he reached right behind the rock, Bronze realized that Lily's skin tone was lighter than Othello's and that he had made a mistake. He squeezed his eyes shut and attempted to stab her, but Othello grabbed him and lifted him into the air. Bronze stabbed Othello in the neck and his cannon sounded, which made Lily jolt around. Lily insulted Bronze and they began fighting. Bronze used his machete to knock Lily's knife out of her hand, and as he was about to stab her, she grabbed his hair and pulled it. He gasped as he was recovering from the sudden attack, but Lily pushed him as hard as she could, and he fell off the mountain, snapping his neck, leaving Lily as this year's victor. Following her victory, Lily returned to District 11 and lived a rather quiet life, never getting married, although she did adopt a girl who was killed in later games. The 107th Games took place in the year 129 and took place in tunneled caves. They featured a mutt known as the Snake Mutt, and there was a poisonous smoke release, and the games lasted for 5 days. Being reaped 10 days after his 12th birthday, this year's victor was the youngest ever victor of all time. This year's victor was Acre Scrimger, aged 12 from District 9. During the bloodbath, the couriers targeted Acre, due to him being of a younger age than all of the other tributes. However, he narrowly escaped the sword of Isis from two and escaped, running as fast as he could. He watched his district partner being slaughtered by Isis, but ignored this and cried as he continued running. Due to the heat, Acre threw away his jacket but then decided to keep it in case it got cold. On the second day, he snuck up behind the muscular chop from 10 and strangled him to death using his jacket, which impressed some of the other tributes, seeing as Acre was quite young. Isis and the other couriers watched this, realizing that Acre was much more intelligent and strong than they had initially thought him to be. On the third day, the poisonous smoke was released into the arena, and as Acre was sleeping, Game Maker Griffin awoke him with an announcement that all tributes needed to grab a mask from the cornucopia if they wanted to survive the poisonous smoke. Acre groaned and ran towards the cornucopia, before leaping off a nearby tunnel and landing on his knees. As he began bleeding from his scraped knee, he hobbled over to the cornucopia and grabbed a mask. As he fled, he noticed an axe sticking out of the grass. He then looked up to see Isis and Irene, both from 2, approaching him. He looked at them, then at the axe. As Isis approached him and laughed, Acre grabbed the axe and threw it into his stomach, turning it to run. He entered a nearby tunnel and gasped as he ran, before hearing the screams of Rune from 1 as he succumbed to the poisonous smoke. Acre navigated the labyrinth of tunnels throughout the night before encountering Knight from 6 hiding. Despite attempting to strangle him, Acre eventually agreed to form an alliance with Knight for the time being. On the morning of the 4th day, however, Acre woke up to the sound of stomping and found that Knight was holding a knife to his throat. Acre gasped and Knight told him to be quiet before sniggering. As he was about to stab him, however, Ruby from 1 appeared from behind and threw a spear at Knight's back, which made him drop to the ground. Acre scurried backwards from Ruby and hid in a nearby tunnel for the rest of the day, frequently peeking over his shoulder. On the morning of the 5th day, Acre decided to move again. Eating bread from a bag he had stolen from the cornucopia, he sat down and rested for a few minutes at each new tunnel he encountered. This continued for the rest of the day until Acre ran out of bread and went to sleep. On the morning of the 6th day, Acre was awoken to the sound of hissing. As he glanced up, he noticed a ginormous snake slithering through the tunnel towards him. The snake was extremely huge, and Acre ran immediately back to the cornucopia, and a cannon sounded, which belonged to Ruby, who had been eaten by one of the many snakes chasing the final 4 tributes. By the time Acre reached the cornucopia, he was so exhausted he collapsed on his knees and wheezed. Another cannon sounded, leaving just Acre and Irene as the final 2 tributes for this year. Irene ran into the cornucopia, armed with a sword, and Acre scurried backwards. As Irene attempted to stab him, Acre grabbed one of the rocks nearest to him and threw it at Irene. It hit her in the stomach, and as she fell to the ground in pain, Acre grabbed her sword and stabbed her in the back, emerging victorious. Following his victory, Acre helped Drin Green mentor the tributes of District 9 in future years, before he got married. The 108 games took place in the year 130 and took place in a temperate rainforest. They featured 3 frogs, contained a feast, and lasted for 14 days. This year's games was relatively easy for the victor to win, as the career pack was disunited and did not act in a manner deserving of sponsor gifts, which led to their downfall. This year's victor was 15-year-old Autumn Spitell of District 10. After the bloodbath, Autumn bent over to retrieve a bottle of water she had dropped, only to burn her hand on the ground. She gasped in pain and realized that the floor of the forest was extremely hot. The ground did not show any heat, however, and the heat killed many unsuspecting tributes over the next few days as they slept and immediately received boiling burns to their body. Autumn decided that she would sleep by climbing a tree, which she did. She noticed the couriers arguing nearby, but they spent their nights sleeping on crates from the cornucopia. Autumn watched how they were usually arguing, realizing it would not take much to turn them against each other. Over the next few days, Autumn remained in the tree and realized that the tributes' shoes were given thicker soles in order for the tributes not notice how hot the ground actually was. She heard the couriers arguing but did not think much about it, until she realized that the couriers were not earning any sponsor gifts due to their constant bickering. On the 3rd day, after going without food for 3 days, Autumn killed a frog and desperately ate it. She appeared to hate it and find it disgusting, even vomiting at the taste of the slimy frog, but she continued eating it until she held her stomach in delight. She continued killing frogs for food until she got a sponsor gift on the 9th day. She ate the bread from the sponsor gift and continued observing the fighting careers. On the 13th day, the feast was announced in the tribute, and as the careers did not have any food due to lack of sponsors, they all decided to go. Autumn realized that she could kill some of them during the feast, and so she followed them to the cornucopia. To her surprise, once the careers were in the cornucopia, Casca from 2 slayed all of them and the remaining tributes. Autumn shook her head and fled, whilst Casca looked around for his final opponent. The next day a fire broke out and Autumn ran into a clearing to escape it, where Casca had run as well. Casca threw a knife at her, yet she caught it, and as he charged at her, she stabbed him in the heart, emerging victorious. Autumn suffered nightmares after her victory and stayed in isolation for a few months. Ultimately, she moved back to District 10 and signed an official contract with Dovecote Derby, stating that Rio stables would offer horses for their races. The 109th Games took place in the year 131 and took place in a Japanese garden. They featured vicious piranhas, a tree collapsed, and lasted for 10 days. It was the outliers this year that performed the best and reminded tributes that underestimating outliers only leads to your own downfall. This year's victor was a 16-year-old from District 12 named Sarah Wellwood. During the bloodbath, Sarah and her district partner Ross grabbed bows and arrows and fired them in quick succession at many other tributes. Between them, they managed to kill 9 tributes during the bloodbath, including 5 members of the career pack, leaving just the muscular Oscar from 4 as the only remaining career. Sarah and Ross continued their killing spree over the next few days. They had purposely earned low scores of 5 and 6 respectively during training in order not to draw attention to themselves. Their mentors, Delilah and Restoro, were proud of their success and they were sent sponsor gifts. Occasionally, Sarah was annoyed as Ross took pleasure in killing his opponents, laughing as he drowned a Tomiko from 3 underwater on the 6th day. Sarah shot at Tomiko to spare him a painful death, which annoyed Ross. He told her that he was tired of being underestimated by the careers and he only wanted to win. By the 8th day, only 7 tributes remained, due to Sarah, Ross, and Oscar having eliminated most of the others. Ross and Sarah continued hunting for victims, and whilst they were chasing Muff from 8 through the trees, the trees began collapsing inwards on them, with a sharp branch hitting Ross in the leg, but he managed to stumble after Muff. Muff was struck by one of the trees and as he cried for help, Ross immediately shot him in the head before turning and running. Sarah glared at Ross as he panted before she tripped him. He fell into one of the ponds where the piranhas were swimming, and his screams of pain and anger slowly quietened until his cannon sounded. District 12 was enraged with Sarah having killed Ross, and all sponsor gifts stopped arriving for her. However, she did not seem to care, and after making sure she had escaped the tree fall, she rested by the pond. The next day, she killed 2 more tributes, leaving just her, Oscar, and Raphael from 14 remaining by the 10th day. As the game makers announced that the remaining 3 tributes needed to make it back to the cornucopia in 5 minutes, Sarah got to her feet and ran towards the cornucopia with her weapon at the ready. When she finally reached, Oscar flipped across the clearing and charged at her, yet Raphael jumped on his back and snapped his neck. Sarah glanced at Raphael, who was pulling back the sleeves of his jacket as he glanced at her. Raphael appeared slightly amused and congratulated Sarah for having killed 5 careers. Sarah thanked him, and Raphael smirked before putting his hands up, allowing Sarah to shoot him in the heart with an arrow. As he fell to the ground, Sarah said she was sorry and sat with him until he died. After her victory, she returned to District 12 a hero and opened up a training academy in order to train future tributes to be careers. She got married and had 2 daughters, both of whom volunteered and joined the career pack in their games, only to be killed towards the conclusion of the games. As this was the 110th games taking place in the year 132 for the 7th quinquennial quell. Because it was a quinquennial quell, President Flickerman made an announcement on Capitol TV that this year, in order to remind the rebels that the gods are not always in your favor, the male and female youths with the highest Tesseract claims will be your district's tributes this year. This suggested that it would most likely be 18-year-olds representing the district this year, which left viewers in anticipation of the upcoming games. Victors of Farmer Quells: Finnick Jr. O'Dare, Madison Hawker, Ruma Lark, Dollar Crusoe, Tritica McDonald, and Lucius Castro were paraded throughout the city and gave speeches at various ceremonies. This year's victor was a 17-year-old from District 6 named Charlotte Wren. Charlotte had been reaped as she had to support her 6 siblings as well as her ill mother and herself. This meant that her name was in the Reaping Bowl 54 times, which was the highest amount of Tesseract claims of District 6 females this year. Her district partner was an 18-year-old boy named Autus, who had his name in 67 times due to him having to support his elderly grandparents, handicapped cousins, and younger siblings. During training, she and Autus both scored a 7, which impressed her mentor, Madison Hawker. During the interviews, Charlotte noticed that the careers were not volunteers due to the Quell rules for this year. She told Madison that she would hence not think of them as the enemy, but Madison told her about Amazon from 2 and his aggressiveness. The night before the games, she was visited by Madison, who told her that Autus would protect her. Charlotte looked at it and nodded as she pulled on a black jacket before her tube was lifted into the arena. This year's games took place in an arena called the Wonderland of Dead, featuring wild birds and cunning rabbits as well as plants coming to life. They also lasted for 17 days. Charlotte immediately glanced around at the cornucopia before looking at a high gate. Beyond the gate there were humongous mushrooms and thick vines present, although the arena was described as the most beautiful ever by Rubius Dalton. When the gong sounded, Charlotte ran inwards, and she avoided a knife that Amazon had thrown. She then grabbed a bowl of soup and a pillow and ran, avoiding a trident Plankton launched at her, and she grabbed it before running. She encountered Autus on the 5th day and agreed to share some of her soup with him. They agreed to start an alliance and appeared to enjoy the playful rabbits which chased each other beneath the pair's feet. After killing some birds for food, the pair agreed to explore the arena for the next few days. Over the next few days, she and Autus aimlessly roamed the arena, killing birds for food. Charlotte appeared upset that she had to kill rabbits, but Autus told her that she needed to kill them for food. By the 13th day, only 6 tributes remained. Charlotte and Autus had a deep conversation about their families back home in District 6, with Autus describing his parents' death in a freak accident several years prior. Charlotte spoke in an angry tone that this Quell twist was not fair, as the tributes were needed by their families back home. One tribute died on the 14th, 15th, and 16th day, mainly at the hands of Amazon. Autus and Charlotte agreed to split up in order to not have to kill each other, and they both walked towards the cornucopia. When the plants came to life later that evening, they chased the 4 remaining tributes, and a vine wrapped itself around Plankton's neck, strangling him. While Charlotte was being pursued by Amazon, he was knocked unconscious by Autus, and the pair from District 6 both collapsed to the ground in exhaustion, sleeping next to each other. On the 14th day, Charlotte woke up to Autus's cannon after he had been killed by Amazon. She then turned her to see Amazon towering over her. As he smiled, he raised his knife and tried to stab her, but she kicked him in the face before grabbing her trident and slamming it into his throat, winning the games. After her victory, she returned to District 6 and no longer needed to support her family due to the amount of money the capital paid her after her victory. The 111th games took place in the year 133, taking place in windmill fields. They featured vicious hawks, windmill explosions, and lasted for 8 days. This year's games proved that one must never underestimate their opponents and always keep an eye on their allies who have the potential to become enemies. This year's victor was a 17-year-old from District 4 named Brooke Albrecht. The week before the games, during training, Brooke told her allies that she would be the one leading the career pack this year. Because of this, Brooke was supposed to make the starting signal as the countdown began. She pointed at each of her allies before pointing at a different tribute that they were supposed to kill. When the gong sounded, this plan worked well, with each of the careers managing to grab either a knife or a sword, killing a total of 7 tributes between them, making Brooke proud of herself. The group continued this killing spree over the rest of the first day, and by night they had killed 10 tributes. When they ambushed an outlying pack, Brooke and the other couriers noticed Flick from Tree escaping, but Brooke dismissed her as not a threat, and so the other couriers let her run, although their mentors in Snow Square were shouting at them to kill Flick, as they believed it was too early to determine who was a threat and who wasn't. When the group awoke the next morning, it appeared that Brooke had become slightly arrogant after the events of the previous day. They roamed around the arena but did not find any tributes to kill, but did realize that there were landmines present all around the arena. Slate from 2 suggested finding someone who knew how to activate these landmines, as they could kill other tributes using the mines, but just as Brooke was about to answer, the group was attacked by a kettle of hawks, forcing them to move away from the mines, although Seaton from 4 was pecked on the arm. On the evening of the 5th day, the group were resting when they heard a rock fall nearby. The couriers decided to send Brooke and Slate to investigate, but to their shock, Flick was waiting for them, and she opened her jacket, revealing an explosive vest she had made. Slate grinned and walked towards Flick with his sword, but as he was about to slash her with it, she blew up her vest, throwing Slate and Brooke backwards, with Flick's cannon sounding immediately. The other couriers immediately ran towards the pair, and Iunia was enraged to see that a piece of shrapnel from the explosion had landed in Slate's eye, and he was clearly in agony. But his cannon sounded only a few seconds later when Iunia turned on Brooke, telling her that if she had not said Flick was not a threat, the pack would still have 6 members and not 3. Brooke frowned and asked Iunia what she meant, but Iunia quickly snapped Seaton's neck. She then began kicking Brooke, who was on the ground, but she accidentally stepped on Brooke's knife, causing the knife to enter her toe, and she yelled in pain, but Brooke slit her throat, running away from her allies. She roamed the arena for the next 2 days with no intentions. On day 8, the windmill directly next to her exploded, and she had to run through the streets to safety. She realized that the final fight was imminent, but as she considered how she could win without a showdown, the 3 of the remaining 5 cannons sounded, leaving just Brooke and another tribute as the 2 remaining tributes for this year. Brooke stopped to consider who this tribute was, but more and more windmills blew up and she sprinted towards the cornucopia just as a knife flew into her abdomen. This caused Brooke to fall to the ground, and she began shaking as Valorum from 1 marched towards her and retrieved the knife from her abdomen, before slamming it into her shoulder, making Brooke scream even louder as she glared at him. As Valorum was about to stab her heart, however, a hawk pooped on his head, causing him to yelp in disgust, and Brooke managed to get to her feet and she slit Valorum's throat with his own knife, leaving her as the winner. She returned to District 4 after her victory and was not quite pleased by the reaction to her games, with many stating that the training academy in District 4 needed to teach tributes more efficient and effective ways to identify threats. Despite this, Brooke remained a strong career girl and became a decent mentor to future female tributes of the district. The 112th games took place in mangroves. They featured slimy frogs and loud macaws, featured a tree collapse, and lasted for 13 days. This year's games were not as well received as the 111th games, due to less action and an actionless showdown. During the week, this year's victor was an 18-year-old from District 3 named Console Chase. During the week before the games, Console saw that the careers this year were mainly focused on intimidating other tributes, and so during the 2 days of training, he discreetly followed them, trying to hear their plans, but this ultimately saw him get into a fight with Bo from 1, who correctly guessed that Console was trying to follow the group. Luckily for Console, he and Bo were both tasered by training staff before Bo could seriously hurt him. Console also realized that he would need to start an alliance if he wanted to win, and he decided to start the alliance with Reed from 9, who he believed to be a strong ally due to his skills with a sickle, although Reed was a little suspicious of Console. Console agreed to cover Reed during the bloodbath, and so when the gong sounded, he kept watch as Reed ran into the mouth of the cornucopia, grabbing an axe. But he was approached from behind by Phoenix from 2, but Console shouted at him to look out, and so just in time, Reed was easily able to kill Phoenix with the axe. The boys immediately left the cornucopia clearing, and it was noticed by Rubius Dalton that the bloodbath had in fact been relatively bloodless. Only 2 tributes had died during the bloodbath, including Phoenix, which left only 24 tributes remaining and annoyed the capital. Over the first half of the day, Consul and Reed kept an eye out for other tributes and traveled closer towards the perimeter. Consul's idea. Reed was pecked on the head by a macaw, but Consul dragged him to safety, much to the relief of their supporters. After they had been hidden by the trees, Consul was gifted a bandage and he cleaned out Reed's wound. Later that day, another flock of macaws attacked the boys, and whilst they fled, Reed suggested they hide in one of the large areas filled with water. Consul agreed to this plan, and the boys hid here for the next 7 days, avoiding the macaws in a rather effective manner, impressing Capitol viewers. On day 8, they decided to leave their hiding spot and kill several macaws before deciding to eat them for dinner. As they did so, however, they suddenly heard the taunts of the couriers quickly approaching them, and Consul and Reed hid behind a tree as Bo and Scorpy from one argued over where the nearest tributes were. Consul could be seen shaking as Bo shouted at Raph from 4 to figure out where the Volt Monkey was hiding, whilst Bo leaned over the tree Consul was hiding behind. Consul glared at a nearby tree, but he gripped his axe before Reed pointed at the tree. Consul gave Reed eye contact, and he cut down the tree, and this fell on Bo and Scorpy, making them scream, and they became trapped underneath. Both of them were hit on the head and their cannon sounded, whilst Raph survived, but he was axed in the head by Consul. On the night of day 12, the game makers caused several trees to collapse onto each other, forcing the remaining tributes to run back to the cornucopia. Consul narrowly avoided being hit, but Reed threw his sight at Consul and he shouted, but Reed was then crushed by a falling tree, with his cannon sounding instantly. Consul was then impaled in the back by an extremely sharp branch that had flown off of a tree. Consul dropped to the ground in pain and he crawled towards the water, beginning to hide as more and more trees fell. 3 more cannons sounded, and Consul remained in the water. But on the next day, he suddenly spun around to see Hippolyte from 6 throwing a knife towards him, and this hit his shoulder. But as she aimed another knife for his heart, he grabbed one of the branches nearest to him and stabbed it into Hippolyte's heart, causing her to fall into the water, leaving Consul as the victor of the 112th games. He returned to District 3 following his victory and suffered nightmares. He was also known to become unstable at times, even hitting himself during the reapings in District 6 the following year. He had to go through therapy because of his instability and became addicted to alcohol. The 113th games took place in the year 135 in a cactus forest. They featured rattlesnakes, an earthquake, and lasted for 9 days. This year's victor became notorious for her way of killing off her opponents. Her games were therefore played in training academies in Districts 1, 2, and 4 in order to give the potential tributes ideas on how to put on a good show during the games. This year's victor was a 17-year-old from District 1 named Champagne Vasey. Minutes before the games began, Champagne learned from her mentor, Azora, that the other careers had allowed the muscular tributes of District 12 to join their alliance. This infuriated her, but Azora managed to convince her to give the 12s a chance. When the gong sounded, Champagne did not listen to Azora and grabbed a knife, killing Bryn and Anise, both from 12, by throwing them at cacti, causing the spikes to impale their body. The other couriers turned on Champagne, but she grabbed her district partner Luster, and they fled from their allies, reaching the perimeter after a few hours. They scoured through the oasis, and Champagne noticed that several tributes had cut their hands against the cacti, and she pointed this out to Luster, who congratulated her for this. They followed the trails of blood to the tributes and managed to kill Brute from 7, despite him putting on a very strong fight. For the next few days, the pair tried to find water, but they did not know that Game Maker Griffin had put a ban on sponsor gifts for the time being, and therefore Champagne and Luster could not find any water. This made them very grumpy and thirsty, but after chasing and killing Cedaro from 11, with Champagne throwing him against a rather sharp cactus, they saw that he had a bottle of water in his pocket that he had stolen from the cornucopia. The tributes from 1 made their way back to the cornucopia, but once they reached the cornucopia, they encountered the couriers, who chased them, and during the chase, a knife was thrown into Luster's head. Although he survived, Champagne realized that he was a liability and slammed his head into a cactus, which killed him instantly, and this left Champagne without water and without an ally. although she was finally gifted with water by sponsors after game maker Griffin lifted the ban. Champagne came up with a plan to get rid of the other careers, and therefore she grabbed several rattlesnakes and kept them in her pockets, managing to knock them unconscious with a rock. On day 7, Champagne realized was about to release the rattlesnakes into the careers' camps before the ground began rumbling, and this caused many of the cacti to begin falling, and Gnaeus from 2 was killed when a cacti hit him full in the face. Once the earthquake was over and the careers were regaining their senses, Champagne seized her chance and released the rattlesnakes into the cornucopia, grinning as she heard the sounds of the career's screams, and all 3 of them turned on each other, but only Antonina from 2 survived this encounter, but she was quickly killed by Champagne seconds later. Champagne used the career's supplies for the next day and killed 3 more tributes, either by releasing rattlesnakes into their camp or by smashing their faces into a cactus. Hence, by the time the sun dawned on day 9, only Champagne and Hyde from 10 remained, and Champagne was a little nervous as she ran towards the cornucopia to face off Hyde, as he was quite powerful. But she managed to stab him 3 times She was stabbed 3 times in the shoulder during her fight with Hyde, but she released a rattlesnake into his shirt, and while he was distracted, she slammed his head into a cactus, instantly killing him. After her victory, she moved to the capital and was known to have a good relationship with her mentor. She became a cosmetic surgeon and was known to please customers. The 114th games took place in the year 136 in underground sewers. They featured mischievous rats and a tsunami and lasted for 9 days. This year's games delighted capital viewers and reminded everyone that the careers will never always have their way. This year's victor was Antoine Libmunk, aged 15 of District 11. Despite being one of the younger tributes this year, Antoine already had developed muscles and a towering build from his work in the fields. This was noticed by the other careers, and after the parade, they spent time trying to convince Antoine to join their alliance, but he declined their offer, making him one of their targets. He escaped from the bloodbath with a knife and a bag of food, and wandered the tunnels of the arena, wrinkling his nose from the stench. He noticed a rat and stabbed it, before throwing his knife at a rat that had been climbing up a wall, which pinned its head to the wall. He grinned and continued on its way, eating food from his bag whilst making sure to stay one step ahead of the careers, who made no attempt to hide that they were targeting him. 8 tributes were part of this alliance, and Antoine had no idea how he would escape all 8 of them if it came down to a fight between him and them. However, the careers did not manage to track him down until the 7th day, when they attacked him whilst he was sleeping. However, it was clear that they had underestimated his strength, and moments after he had been attacked, Antoine grabbed Lord and Miracella, both from 1, and simultaneously strangled them whilst the other 6 careers tried to kill him with their swords. After the cannons of Lord and Miracella sounded, Antoine grabbed several rats and threw them at the faces of Amelia and Algernon, both from 2, and stabbed them as they yelled in surprise. He then glanced at the remaining 4 careers, who were already running away, fearing this 15-year-old outlier. The game makers announced the next day that all the sewage water would suddenly rise up in the form of a tsunami, which made the 8 remaining tributes turn into the cornucopia. 2 cannons sounded, belonging to Samsung from 3 and Steak from 10, who had drowned in the tsunami. On the 9th day, only Antoine and Netter from 4 and Venus from 5 remained. After Netter had his neck snapped by Venus, she and Antoine were coerced into the same room of the sewers to fight each other. Both of them put up a strong fight, but Antoine stabbed Venus in the back and apologized, before drowning her in the sewage water, emerging victorious. After his victory, he became a hero in District 11 for killing 4 of the 8 careers. He embraced his fame and was occasionally found on tours in the capital, before he started a brewery brewing Leblanc liquor for the mayor of 11. For the 115th Hunger Games, President Flickerman decided that, to remind the rebels of the influence of Hunger Games victors, previous victors will select the tributes of their districts this year. This year's victor was an 18-year-old from District 6 named Royce Luther. Madison Hawker and Charlotte Wren, victors of the 85th and 110th Hunger Games, had to make a tough choice due to almost all of the district's youths being under the effects of morphling, as well as the pair being pressured to produce 2 victors and 2 consecutive quinquennial quells. Royce was eventually selected as the male tribute, due to him being the younger brother of Oregon looter and sharing some of his older brother's skills with pilot maneuvers. This year's games took place in an arena called Four Seasons, featuring bears, deer, insects, and hedgehogs. They also featured rotating weather and lasted for 10 days. When the gong sounded, Royce froze for a second and turned around to see the carnage occurring and saw that he was in the winter section of the arena. Instead of the cornucopia, there was a large tree which had one part in the winter, spring, summer, and autumn sector. Royce was targeted by Severus from 2, who believed that Royce may have plenty of sponsor gifts, due to Royce's brother being a capital favorite, but Royce managed to fend off Severus and grabbed a bottle of water and several apples, sprinting towards the autumn sector, as he was more familiar with this sector as he was from District 6. Royce spent the first few days of the games running away from the couriers, mainly Severus and Macy from 2, as they were members of the Dalton family known for its brutality, and Royce certainly did not want a long and painful death at the hands of the 2 Daltons. However, he soon had a change of heart and instead followed Severus and Macy, grabbing food and water that they had dropped by accident. And Royce was incredibly stealthy and he managed to steal the food without being noticed, which is how he survived after he finished his apples on the 3rd day of the games. But by now, Severus and Macy had stopped dropping food after realizing their mistake. On day 4, the weather started changing and a weather disaster took place in each sector. Royce sprinted away from a thunderstorm in the autumn sector and escaped hedgehogs that were chasing him, but he was soon greeted by a wild blizzard in the winter sector, as well as many bears who tried to kill him, but he stabbed the bears with his knife and used their fur to make a coat for himself. He then hunted down and stabbed Severus and Macy, making him a capital favorite for the win, but he was noted to be very scared of the games after they had killed his brother during the 100 games. After surviving like this for many days, he grew extremely thirsty and begged for water, but Game Maker Griffin had called a ban on sponsor gifts. Royce soon learnt of this and flew into a rage, kicking several trees, but this only caused him to hurt his toe, and he realized this would not help him in any way. He made his way back to the center of the arena and snatched some roots of the central tree, using the roots to produce water, which he heartily drank. For some reason, his strategic strategy was not copied by any other tributes, despite this strategy being right in front of them. One evening, Royce was approached by a thirsty Brick from 12 who begged Royce for water, if he had any. Royce asked Brick to give him his dagger and Brick reluctantly agreed, before Royce taught him how to extract water from the roots of the tree. Brick appreciated Royce teaching him, but on the night of day 9, Royce was awoken by a sound. When he woke up, he saw Brick running away with his water supply and Royce chased the boy, grabbing the bottles. But Brick managed to escape unharmed, whilst Royce stormed back to his camp and muttered to himself that he was going to win this year's games. The next morning, Royce was chased by several bears, but he managed to climb the central tree and escape them. But he saw how bloodthirsty they were when they ripped pieces of bark from the tree. Royce then climbed down the tree and ran away as fast as he could, trying to find his 2 remaining opponents. Silik from Tree managed to find Royce first, and she chased him towards the central tree, but she was attacked by one of the bears and her cannon sounded. Later, Royce managed to chase down Brick, his only remaining opponent, but Brick threw a sword at him, hitting him in the shoulder. He hobbled towards the central tree, being chased by Brick. The bears then attacked Brick, however, and tore pieces of flesh out of his neck, with Brick's cannon sounding and leaving Royce as the winner. After his victory, Royce became a hero in District 6 and even became reunited with his brother Oregon, who had been residing in Germania since his abduction in 112. Royce and his mentor Charlotte were praised for bringing District 6 2 consecutive quell victories, and both victors embraced his fame and lived happy lives with their families. So, thank you for watching this video. Some of you might have been confused because Oregon in Christian's series, Oregon actually died, as did Delilah and Restoro. But I posted this alternate universe on Reddit, where basically what the bodies are retrieved by the hovercraft, and it's revealed that it's actually the hovercraft has Unidad inside, and they bring the tributes back to life because they sound the cannons before the tributes die. And all the tributes are taken to Germania, but some of them return to the capital. Thank you for your understanding. Bye. Please note that on March 15th or on some of the dates close to March 15th, I will be posting games 116 to 125. Bye and have a great month.